We are live.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, April 2nd. This is a meeting of the Board of Education curriculum meeting. Our next meeting is scheduled for May 7th. Today, we are talking about elementary progress reports as well as an update on our K-3 literacy. So I will turn it right over to Julie and Amy and Mr. Schmidt.
Just before they start, I just want to recognize both of them. Jeannie's here also from union representation, because both of those items, they'll discuss what we've done and the outcome, but the process of what they've been engaged in, both with the collaboration and the process with staff throughout both of these things, have been pretty significant. And actually, that's one of the things we're most proud of in terms of the inclusiveness of the participation. So with that, I'll just turn it over. Go ahead.
And I just would want to say that this is really important to talk about elementary progress reports as one mechanism for communicating with families. And we know that our staff is really dedicated to that ongoing communication with families. So while today we're going to talk specifically about conferences and those formal reports, it's also important to recognize the commitment of both our staff and our parents to have ongoing communication throughout the course of the year, because especially at the elementary level, children make such huge growth and gains at different points of the year. I always make the analogy of it's like when, you buy your kids a new pair of shoes and you put your thumb there and think they have plenty of room, and then they've outgrown it. So we want to be checking on progress more often and communicating even more often. And I know we do that than these conference and progress report days. So Julie and Jeannie have both been in important leadership roles in this work, and we'll be able to, I think, also speak to the teachers, the nuance of the teachers' involvement throughout the discussion. So I'll turn it over to them.
Yeah. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And I'm Jeannie Tershman, as a fifth grade teacher at Hinley, also the DEA vice president. And she has been involved in this since the beginning. So just some background. This work began, people were thinking that our progress reports needed revision for a long time. I think they hadn't been revised since 2015 or maybe prior to that. But this came out of an MOA as part of the contract negotiations in 2023 with the DEA. The DEA designated representatives for this committee, and it is chaired by me. We convened a committee, and we had our first meeting in spring 2023. We developed and implemented a survey for teachers just to gather feedback on what was working, what changes they wanted to see, and just some big themes: changing of the timing of the fall conferences, more consistency with expectations around comments, better alignment of the indicators with our curriculum, and many challenges with the technical aspect of Aspen. So overall, some themes that emerged. Positives were detail and clarity in the academic section. They liked the way everything was broken down, and there was a lot of specificity. The social emotional learning emphasis, because we know that that is really important, and parents always want to know about how their child is doing in terms of relationships and all of those learning habits. And a glow was that there was flexibility in the comment section, that some people could write more, some could write less, some could write narratives, some could write bullets. So people liked being able to personalize that. On the flip side, they wanted to reduce the complexity and the time consumption. It takes each teacher about 6 hours to complete a progress report. So it's a lot of work. They wanted more clarity and alignment with the standards and with the curriculum. There were some indicators that were hard to score, and they wanted that improved functionality. In the summer, we had teams synthesize that data and work on revising the indicators and develop a goal bank for comments. And the goal bank was not to create a drop-down menu. It was just to say, these are the typical things that align with the standards, the priority standards that parents always ask about, that I always want to give feedback on. And so we thought that that would be helpful to all of our teachers. So, and it was. And then we also met with Dr. Dad and revised the social emotional learning component. So throughout the 2023 school year, the math and literacy team took a really, really deep dive at unpacking those standards and looking across, like, what do they really mean? How do we prioritize and how do we communicate? How do we create indicators in a way that's parent-friendly, but also that aligns with our curriculum and is not too cumbersome for teachers? And then we wanted to ensure vertical cohesion K-5. Last school year, after all of that work, we had released time for grade level teachers because what we found with the people that were working on the indicators initially, there would be one fourth grade teacher from one school and one second grade teacher from another. So we really wanted to make sure that we had wide participation. We had to do some release time, and we really dug into those indicators with our teachers. So we had reps from each school and each grade. We worked with Colleen Thompson and Scott and Chris Manfredonia to review and finalize those indicators. And then we used AI feedback after all of this to look for alignment, cohesion in the language, gaps anywhere. We reconvened the committee, we reviewed the drafts, we asked them to go back to their colleagues and gather feedback. It was a very iterative process. There were multiple times that we went back and forth. And then we met with the IT department to discuss Aspen. And Jeannie was really instrumental in that work, so she can speak to that. I'm not going to go through all of these, but can you click on one and I'll just give you an example? And I will say we have made some changes since the parent feedback, the parent questionnaire came back on Friday. Can you scroll up to the social emotional? You can just see the first slide, thank you. The current version is aligned to the CASEL standards. And we cleaned that up and we had the social and personal learning, just about relationships, managing emotions, those things that really are important for learning and that parents always ask about, and then work habits. Do they follow directions in classroom expectations? Can they organize their environment? Can they initiate and complete tasks? And then can you scroll up to the next one? The academic. One of the things in our current iteration, we had effort as the first thing in all content areas. And while effort is really important, and that came through in our parent survey and our teacher feedback also, it's not a standard. So we felt that that was something that teachers could comment on, and it's very important, but we want to focus on the academic standards. One of the things that did come out of the parent survey was that they missed the subheadings because that was helpful to organize. So they're back in. We were trying to streamline, but you can see, and I'm not going to go through each thing, but you can see how these very clearly align to the science of reading, and parents can know exactly how their child is doing with more specificity. Can you also scroll? I won't go through everything because you do have links, but it's the same thing with the writing. And I want to point out one thing for the math, if you could scroll up to that section. When our committee first met and we started our conversation was with what is really important in each of these content areas, and everybody said the mathematical practices, which was something that was an important part of the standards when they were revised in 2015, but they're hard to quantify and they were not in our previous report card. So we have the mathematical practices here. We have them for all grades. This is a elementary and family-friendly version. We tried to eliminate all of the academic jargon in these indicators so that people really understand what is important in the teaching and learning of mathematics and how are we going to be able to communicate that to families.
Julie, if I can just add one thing to that, it's really interesting that we have, so the math content standards are what probably most people would expect to see as far as, for example, children counting, adding and subtracting with intent. It's interesting that Connecticut has the mathematical practice standards, and those, I would say, reflect more of what probably we're getting at with Vision of the Graduates. So it's not just enough to know the standard, the finite skill. It's that and how that skill is applied and integrated within the child's thinking and their work with others. So that metacognition piece, the piece about communicating, really persevering, making sense of a problem, persevering, being able to explain your thinking. That is reflected more like in the vision of the graduate competency. So I just wanted to make that connection for the group.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. And I won't go through all of them. You have links to all of them, and again, we're still in the process of going back and forth. The parent feedback, they appreciated the SEL section. There was feedback about adjusting it to reflect grade level expectations, and what the parents don't realize is that part of our work is to develop a handbook, and that's where we'll get granular, and we're really going to cross-check that against yardsticks and provide specific behaviors at each grade. They appreciated the clarity. Overwhelmingly, parents said that the indicators were clear to extremely clear. They wanted the subheadings back, and that's there. They talked about effort. Parents consistently valued personalized comments and provided some good feedback about ways that we can improve that area of the progress report. And in terms of access, we asked about the technical aspect. They told us that they can access their progress reports and easily in Aspen, but difficulty downloading and printing. So that's something also that our IT department is working on. In terms of parent conferences, we moved, as you will recall, we did this last year, we moved the first conference from after Thanksgiving to mid-October, and families really appreciated that earlier touch point. They did ask us to, a few of them, consider moving up the spring conference, and we talked about that as well. But it's hard because of our timing. January is our benchmarking, winter assessment period, and then we have February break, and teachers want to complete progress reports before conferences because they're collecting all that data and synthesizing it. So we could consider moving it up a week or so, but it is really hard to move it any earlier. And that's pretty typical of where everybody has their spring conferences. So this is just the timeline of conferences, progress reports, and how we're communicating, and we will have comments on every trimester of the progress reports. So some of the enhancements, as I said, we've already added some subheadings. We're just finding this is like just very granular, but more like little nitpicky things that we're finding in language. We are developing handbooks. There's going to be a teacher handbook and a family handbook with rubrics, so that there's clarity about the expectations across each semester. And we are going to develop clear expectations for comments, making sure that they provide personalization, consistency, talk about that effort, and specifically communicate students' areas of growth around academics and their strengths as well. So some of the enhancements to Aspen, and again, Jeannie can speak more to this, we are making it more teacher friendly. Our IT department is working so that teachers can preview previous progress reports, previous trimester marks. They can only look at this trimester, which has been challenging. Teachers have to have multiple screens up at a time. They also, when they enter marks, they can only enter one curricular area at a time, so it's a lot of clicking in and out, so they're fixing that up. And we'll have ability for parents to be able to download and print, because some people do appreciate that. And this is just an FYI, a comparison of the DIRG. Most everybody has 2 conferences, progress reports. Some people have progress reports twice a year, but most have 3, most have 2 conferences. So that was just interesting, FYI. And then in fall, we will communicate these changes to teachers and to families, some Aspen training for teachers so that they understand how to navigate the changes. And we'll provide a parent information session to share that handbook, probably closer to when the report cards are actually going home so that it's not lost.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grambling had a question that I'll just start off with. And in reading it, anyways, his says, my only suggestion is to be more clear with parents about teacher conferences and in-person ability. It sometimes seems like remote is the default option instead of in-person. And now reading that, I'm not clear if he thinks the parents are thinking that remote is default or if the teachers are, but can you speak to what, in-person versus remote conferencing?
I think they are all in person. I think we provided that remote option for working families. And sometimes one parent is there in person and one can join remotely. So we,
Is that a possibility that, you could do one of each or do it via Zoom or Teams or whatever? Yeah,
We've
pull it
been-
closer.
Pull it closer,
There you
okay.
go.
We kind of go with in-person as our default. If a parent responds to us and says, hey, I can't make it in, I need to do a Zoom, at that point, we'll provide a link.
Okay.
But we've kind of been trying to get everybody in person. It's a different conversation.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
It's a different conversation.
Okay.
I'm glad that we all three have the same answer. So the expectation, yeah, I was like, that's good. Great formative assessment. So the expectation is that they're in person and upon a parent's request. Because we have parents that for many reasons work schedule otherwise. If a parent requests, we can make an accommodation for one or both parents.
Great. Thank you. And this, of course, does not preclude any phone calls to teachers that parents may have, that
Throughout the
there
year.
are multiple ways to get progress
Throughout the
on.
year.
Yes.
I have a number of questions that are kind of in each area, just on the progress reports specifically, if that's okay. And I totally understand the need for consistency, and I understand that if it's very, very time consuming for teachers, we're trying to make sure that it's aligning to standards, et cetera. Just a few questions. First of all, how are we reflecting in the progress report if a student is below or above grade level in different areas? Because it basically is scoring them on at grade level. And I guess one of the questions would be, how will a parent get feedback on their student if they're, for instance, reading above grade level, and what are their areas where they can, help them in that? So that's one question I wanted to start with.
so that would be in the comments. If a child is above expectations, if below, also the parents would know, because if the child is in our SRBI/MTSS process, we communicate that with parents. Parents get a phone call, they get a
Right.
letter.
I mean, a lot of time people will know if they're in SRBI, but the students that are above grade level don't necessarily they're not in SRBI, they're not identified for that. And so this is just one area where for students that, need the additional challenge, that is one question, and if they're just doing it within the conference and the comments, I understand that.
So I had a similar, yes, yeah, I had a similar on this. My question was, so it seems like there's only sometimes or often as the choices. Was there thought given to a
For
third?
SEL?
Yes, or it looks, is that the
For
same
all
for,
of
I
them.
mean,
No,
what are
no, for all
the?
of them, it's the same, below, near, meets, or exceeds
Okay.
standards. That has not
So
changed.
is it still gonna be I think it was like a one.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, so I had that question as well. I think it would be great if we could see the next iteration. I know you had said that you added the subcategories back. If we could see that, and also the 1 through 4s, that would be helpful. Just for that comprehensive view. But to Robin's point, I wanted to ask this too about remembering when my kids were in there, and you would have, and I remember, every year the principals talk about what does it mean, that approaching the standards that's sort of like where everyone should be, right? That's not a bad thing. And they give that whole speech. But to Robin's point, I think a little additional clarity about, what does it mean? Like, I remember getting those report cards and it's like everything's fine. And then I remember the next grading period getting a report card and it was like all 4s. And I'm like, oh, well, what do I do with this? Right? Like, what does this mean? So it is nice to have a little extra content or context, right? So like Amy, to your point about the shoes, right? Like when I got that report card that was all 4s, that was, the kid who jumped 2 sizes, right? And I think that would just help parents a little bit. And you had mentioned something about the handbook is that just for teachers? But you
No,
said that it would
there's-
share.
there's
So
gonna
is
be a
that
family-
maybe
yes,
something?
That will have exactly what you want.
Okay, great. Could you
Mhm.
talk a little bit more about the handbook and like,
Yes, because the standards are end of grade level standards. So what does that look like across the year? Specifically, what would we be looking for kids to do when they are at below, near, at the standard or exceeding the standard? So we want to be very clear about that to accompany the progress report, because I agree with you, it is hard to understand that. And how does somebody go from one level to another? What is the jump up, or where is the challenge? Great.
So one just follow-up question. So the academic areas, you would have a 1 through 5. Because
1
that
through
was
4, yeah.
1 through 4, because that was not on here.
Yeah.
It just was
Yeah.
the SEL that said
The
sometimes or often. And so that was,
That was a change. The only
Okay.
thing that we put on here for the parents was the change. It's hard to see the work that we did. We do this in Google, and it doesn't look the same as what you see in Aspen. So we were waiting until we're final so that we can get a template in Aspen, because it's hard to read when you look at the Google Doc.
um,
Oh, sorry.
So
Go ahead.
am I-
No, keep going. Yeah.
okay, so on the SEL, one kind of high level question is, given that we have a lot of increased behavioral issues, especially in elementary, I noticed that the new progress reports removed the more specific levels of detail on a lot of the SEL components, which as a parent, I know were very helpful to find out for your kindergartner and first grader and second grader. And, the new ones they're much, much more generic. And so the question I have is, will parents get that level of specificity about their children, with the relationship skills or the social awareness, showing empathy, or, there are things that are really developmentally very important. And the more, the new one that's proposed does not really give them that level of detailed feedback.
And the specific behaviors that go into each of these, again, that would be in the handbook. Like, what does that look like for a kindergartner? We wanted more specificity with those behaviors, so that would be part of our handbook.
But in a conference, is a parent going to get that level of specific feedback from the teacher?
Absolutely, yeah.
But then doesn't that create more work for the teacher? Because then that's going to be in the free form text of comments, as opposed to using what used to be a very specific set of parameters that they had to grade numerically.
Some of those were very difficult to grade numerically.
Okay,
Some of them don't apply to all children,
Okay.
or they, if children are exhibiting them, it's hard to say specifically, like, why this and why this? And is it all the time? And is it some of the time? Those things are really better to have a conversation
Okay.
about.
And
All
I
right,
also
so
think,
that'll
I also
get-
think if you're a student, or if you're a parent of a student who is maybe struggling with behavior, the progress report should not be the first time you're
Right.
hearing about that. So
100%.
you will have conversations
no,
throughout
that's
the.
good
yeah.
point, good point. If I can just go on, so on literacy, just one,
Just on that
sorry,
point,
go ahead.
just on that topic, just only just because we've like the feedback we got from the parents, right? Was there any feedback that, like, honestly, in all transparency and discussion, didn't want any SEL discussion and stuff, because we like,
There were
There's
some,
been-
it was mixed. There
And
were
how-
some
how-
that said, yes, we appreciate it, and there were some that say, this shouldn't be on there at all, and yes.
but the context of it was the majority of people.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of.
Yes. Mhm.
Especially.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
That's a good point. On literacy, one high level question, depending on which K through 3 literacy curriculum we end up getting recommended to implement, will that require a change in the progress reports to the extent that those are based on academic standards?
These are based on standards, and regardless of where we go, the resource does not drive the expectations. And we are always teaching phonemic awareness. We are always teaching all those components, and we are always have the same expectations.
Okay. And then writing, they took out every reference to handwriting, and from experience with my elementary school kids and still today in high school, I don't get the sense that the handwriting is really as much of a priority, and I'm concerned about if it's not even in a progress report, and this is all grades, it was taken out. And then do we even teach cursive? How do we make sure that our kids actually can write neatly? And because in high school, when you're in classes where you have to show all of your work, and some of them don't allow you to take notes on a computer, it has to be in a notebook. We need our kids to actually be able to write and write quickly. And I think this is a really important piece, even though everything's going to computers. And that's
Mhm.
just a question.
No, we didn't take handwriting out. Handwriting is still in there.
It's-
If you
took
look at kindergarten and first grade,
No, it took out, handwrite is legible, like
in
writes legibly.
kindergarten, it says demonstrates proper letter formation.
Right, in
demonstrates
kindergarten it was
proper
there,
Number
But
formation.
it was taken out in 2nd through 5th grade.
The reason that it was taken out is because teachers are not explicitly teaching it. They are doing cursive in 3rd grade. But they don't spend a lot of time on it. So that would be something that teachers would.
Yeah, I
comment
just think
on.
this is a little bit of a deficiency because as a 5th grader, my son was basically graduating 5th grade and his teacher told me, well, he'll just have to type really fast. And I
So-
don't think that that's the right answer to a parent, that you want your kids to actually be able to write legibly. And I think this is still important, even though
It
we
is
type
important
now.
and it is. Mhm.
So it is definitely important, and one of the things that we're looking at is as we're thinking about foundational literacy skills, ensuring that as children are learning letter sounds, they're also learning letter formation and they're making those connections. That is much more explicitly taught in even to some extent pre-K, but in a very developmentally appropriate way, I would add. Kindergarten and first grade, grade 2nd through 5th, most of the development of children's handwriting is really firm at that point. So if a child has a real deficit in that area that is making their handwriting not legible, that's something that would be addressed more like in what used to be SRBI, but now we're talking about MTSS. So children who do have a deficiency there that might need occupational therapy will have that through that type of programming. But really what the research says is that predominantly how children form letters is really pretty firmly established by the end of 2nd grade.
I think it's also like sorry, Kate, go ahead. Are you-
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for that, Amy. I think that it's important to remember developmental stages and just how enormous they are in elementary school. You know, a kindergartner and a 5th grader are so different in so many ways. And it makes sense that just like we talk about the learning to read and the reading to learn phases, that is the same from a writing component to, in a different way. I do think though that the OT is an important piece of that. And I would like to have a conversation, and Shirley, I'd love for you to weigh in, in terms of about how great that focus is and the recognition of those formative periods early on, and the need to make sure that children who are behind are getting evaluations and support. And I think there is a bit of a balance. Like I totally agree with Robin that there's handwriting and calligraphy and some of those things mean something different now in a digital age. And yet at the same time, if people can't understand what you're communicating, either through legibility or something, it's lost. A couple anecdotal things that I think are important because they do seem to be bigger problems. I remember having handwriting was not a rubric in an upper grade. And when I spoke to a teacher about a written thing, I was told that the handwriting was so bad that it took them longer to grade it. It's like, well, how can you mark them down when that's not a metric, right? So it comes in some of those like intangible ways that are important. So, then that led to an OT evaluation. And I was told by an OT that it was too late for a 3rd grader. Which is very troubling and hopefully a one-off. But I do think that those are things that I think this is Robin's point, is about how are we sort of making sure that the focus of this is important at the right phase so that it's not getting missed, because even if we're only cataloging it in those upper grades, how are we making sure that it's still important? And then to the point about the technology, I do want to make sure that we are focusing on kids having those hard hand skills and that we're not defaulting to that. You know, we don't want to be telling kids that spelling doesn't matter and that they can use spell check. We don't want to be automatically offering adaptive technologies without really doing everything that we can for those kids to have the skills within.
That was gonna be my point. I mean, I think as we all start thinking about screen time and how much our kids are in front of screens in elementary school, in middle school, and in high school, you know, I just scribbled my notes here. It's chicken scratch, and I, you know, taught cursive, and I actually did have really nice handwriting at one point, but because I don't use it, it goes away, right? So how do you develop and keep that handwriting legible?
And
So
there is a
I'll-
hand-mind connection.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'll try to answer all those questions, okay? But I'll start with this kind of three levels. The first question I'd start with is instructionally, and you can speak as well.
Can you speak a
I-
little louder?
Certainly. I don't think at any moment that teachers are not paying attention to handwriting. They may not be grading it, it may not be a specific field on the progress report, but it's fair to say, just from a teacher's point of view, that that's constantly being looked at and monitored. So just saying that it may not be explicit instruction to both Amy and Julie's point, but it is going on. Teachers actually comment on it, they help form that. On developmental pieces, I'll just do instruction because I can't imagine saying not, by the way, I always question when someone says something can't get better after third grade. So I have this developmental challenge. I never believe that, okay? There's always ways to improve our ability because there's many reasons why there's handwriting that's illegible. Sometimes kids write too fast. Sometimes they can't form letters. Sometimes I see two left-handed people here. Robin, you're one of them. I'm one of them. There's a whole different way of that works. So there's a lot of reasons, not just developmental, but why handwriting looks the way it looks, or why it looks like chicken scratch, to quote, or why it looks really beautiful. And so a lot of it is the approach to writing. The other part developmentally to your question, Katie, is we did, for OT purposes, you're really looking at fine motor skills. And we did actually, I think it was at Tokenique, if I remember Katie correctly, many years ago, we started putting OT, just kits in each classroom for all students. So they had opportunities to really work on things, not just sensory, but things that really work on fine motor. Some of your students might have had certain hints or grasp that went on pencils. They kind of certain things that they can hold and they can redo their grip. But teachers are aware of that. They have that in their classrooms. They consult with occupational therapists. So that's ongoing, also developmentally looking at it. And lastly, excitingly, and I know it was mentioned last night also, in the Board of Finance, we have our own OTs now. So we have a consistent way of really having a cadre of highly qualified professionals who consult with teachers who are there not on a consulting, I mean, not as a contracting basis, but in-house to really work with all the teachers, students both who receive services and don't receive services. So I think those are the levels you have to look at it on instructionally, developmentally, and what we have for all students. And that really goes into your point of MTSS or SRBI that are just opportunities in the classroom for doing that. Again, I'm saying there may not be a field to measure it, but developmentally there is in kindergarten and first grade, which is when they are working on those actual fine motor skills. But to Katie's point, no one should ever say something can't change after third grade.
Right, or we'd all be in trouble.
Yeah.
It's just,
And around the table. The other thing, I'm glad you mentioned that because, sometimes with young children, this is why we need to think about the whole child through MTSS. It could be that a child has an attentional issue, right? A focus issue. And that's why the handwriting looks the way it does. And we will be thinking about lefties because I have a lefty myself. And even with foundations, though it's a right-handed world, the directions even in that program tell children to form letters the way a right-handed person would. So you have to be thinking about how a left-handed child might interpret that and how to accommodate for a child to form letters in a way that's appropriate for them.
so a couple things. So do teacher reviews. I think my son was probably born a lefty and the teachers decided to teach him as a righty, which also has probably had problems. So do the teachers actually look out for that now when they are in kindergarten to actually make sure that if they do kind of pick up stuff with their left
Yes.
hand, that they teach them how to write?
Yes, they're
With-
very.
Okay, because I think they did not do that, and this was, 16 years ago,
Yeah.
however long. One question, with the, maybe their brain is working so quickly and they're writing really fast and so it's messy, but like now in high school, this actually is an issue because if they have an English assignment and it's a timed assignment and they're told they have to handwrite it first, not on a computer, and then type it in, and this actually happened last semester in, a 10th grade English class. If their handwriting is so messy and they can't write quickly on a timed assessment in high school, which is graded, and then don't have time to finish typing because they ran out, it has ramifications. If by the, end of second grade, this is not addressed, and we didn't have MTSS at the time that my child was, in that age, and they didn't have in-house OTs, and it wasn't attended to. And so I just want to make sure that going forward, this is such a critical skill for our kids. And it only is going to be more important when they get to high school and college, and they might have to be taking notes by hand. And I just want to make sure that that's actually, that the teachers are really paying attention to
Katie, you
that.
wanted to say something?
Just wanted to say that, so that we can finish our conversation about progress reports, perhaps we can make a future agenda item to discuss writing and typing as well
Thank
that
you.
came out
Yep.
of the budget.
Yeah.
That was gonna be
Um,
my
great.
suggestion as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving topics to the narratives. Can you just let us know what the expectations are for teachers? And is there a minimum expectation? How is that laid out to teachers? Because in my, I don't love going anecdotally, but in my own anecdotal experience, there's variation. So just curious what you all say to the teachers about what is expected.
So right now, our expectations are just a glow and a grow, or strength and a challenge for each area. Some teachers write pages. We hope that because these indicators are more clear, that won't be necessary. But we are going to put parameters around the amount, we don't care if it's a narrative or a bulleted format, but just, these are the priority things that parents want to know. And it is personalized and unique with some children. There's some children that you want to speak specifically about a particular content area or the social, emotional, behavioral. So we just want to make sure that the comments enhance and personalize the communication about the child to the parent.
I mean, I would argue that the comments are more important
Yeah,
to
I would
parents
agree.
than
100%.
the ratings.
Right.
So,
Right.
and
So
I know
how
that,
do you bring that to life?
right. And that, that's, that does take hours and hours and hours to do a class of 23 kids or whatever it is. So,
Mhm.
but I would hope that the teachers really are taking that seriously and putting, 100% effort into, because I do feel like that's what the parents care for the most.
Mhm.
And if I could just I agree with you, because back in the day, that's what you would scrapbook, right?
Mhm.
You're probably not scrapbooking the 1 through 4, you're
Mhm.
scrapbooking or putting on the refrigerator when it's easy to print them out, the comments. And many times what I think, even if I think about my own 4 children's report cards when they were younger, and I'm sure, and I've seen them to this day, our staff, they write, they're really, they're looking critically at each child when they're drafting those narratives. Many of the things that they're remarking on are really in alignment with vision of the graduate. So that's another way to kind of look at that, right? Like, how does the child perceive self? What is their social awareness like? How are they engaging with others? How are they communicating? All of those skills are really important, and I agree, valued more
Yeah.
by parents typically and by future employers.
And I think it's also an easy jumping off point for a parent teacher conference. If there's a
Mhm.
sentence in there that sticks out to you,
Right.
you're going to start that conference with that. So,
Right.
um,
Absolutely. And one of the guidelines is it's not about the curriculum. That's not where you're talking about the curriculum. That's where you're talking about the child.
Right.
And you're talking about how that child is doing in the class and how can parents support.
right.
Just a few questions, if we could, just on math. We removed all references to the fact fluency in 3rd and 4th And I think fifth grade too. And I know that the way that, at least maybe I'm outdated, but the way we started teaching math was more on like the number line, the timeline, making sure, making sure that they could do things, so they know the concept as opposed to, demonstrating fact fluency, multiply within 100, like, all of the different things that used to be in, for instance, grade 3 math progress reports. Are we still teaching math facts?
Yes.
Fluently.
Yes. We are teaching
Okay, so maybe it's
strategies, yes. Mhm. Yeah,
It's in there.
it is in there.
Okay,
That-
but
that
like
is
we're doing
important that we are
we're doing
teaching
the
it.
kind of make sure that they have that quick kind of memory for just the basic math facts up to 144, like that in grade 4, I think it got more detailed, but
Yep. So we want
Okay.
kids to have automaticity,
Yeah.
but before they have automaticity, they have to have conceptual
right, of
understanding.
course.
So
yeah,
yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
but we're still doing that. We're still
Yes.
teaching. Okay.
Yes.
That was just a question on that. On social studies, the new progress report took out all the references to applies skills. So, and this is like grades 2 through 5, basically applies map skills or locates processes and applies information from text and sources. So to me, those skills, I would think, are a very fundamental part of making sure that they're actually learning a very critical skill for understanding social studies, for example. How are we
So
doing that with the new
depending,
one?
why, the reason that was tricky was because there are 3 units of science and 3 units of social studies in each trimester. And depending on what the focus is of the unit, if it's a geography unit, you'll talk about more math skills. If it's focusing more on civics, you will talk about those skills. So we wanted it to be more, more general so that teachers aren't marking map skills when they're not teaching map skills because it's in there. But again, that will come out with more of a curriculum overview. Here's what we're teaching in this unit.
But so for example, the new one is basically saying participates actively, demonstrates understanding of basic
Concepts,
concepts.
and you'll know
But
what
it
the
doesn't talk
concepts
about,
are.
you can apply whatever skills. And I think, that for a progress report, I would think that the progress report would say that your student can or cannot apply whatever skills are being taught. That's why I'm trying to understand why, because this is so general now, just about an understanding of a basic concept, but it doesn't now talk about, can they actually apply the skills? That's why I'm wanting to understand that.
And that will be part of our curriculum, actually, is the ability to learn something and then use that, what they're learning.
But how do parents know that their students can then
That's my
use that?
question, yeah.
That would, if they have that understanding of concepts.
I think we just hit on the important piece here right now, and that is that this is a change, and please step in and correct me if anything, but my understanding is that this is a change to how we are reporting progress,
Mhm.
how we are quantifying it and writing it in a way to share it to parents before we then speak to them and dig all that out. What this is not is a change to curriculum or instructional practices.
Right.
So in the things that we are teaching our students, the ways that we are teaching the students remain the same. This is simply an update to how we are communicating that out to parents. So I think that's a really important thing. So I feel like our questions maybe are a little specific, and we need to be thinking more about if something was on a progress report and it's not now, why is that? Does that mean that's not being taught anymore, or is it being captured in a different way? So I think that's one important distinction. I did want to ask, though, following up to that, because we are looking at changing a piece of the curriculum and in terms of literacy and the additional focus on bringing more grammar into the elementary school, I am curious about how the progress reports might change to reflect that going forward.
And you'll see that there is a line for grammar in each, in part of writing.
But do we, like, let's say that we roll out something new next year, will we expect that to be tweaked again?
Well, the standards don't change
No,
though.
right, because the standards won't
And
change.
if I can add, and please correct me if I'm wrong, as you're much more closely related, engaged in this work than I would be at that level, but the companion documents that Julie's referring to, like a handbook, should provide more discrete information about within that standard. Within the standards, there are learning progressions, right? So what do we want children to be able to do to actually get to that standard as the end mark? So Katie, I think what you're asking about would be more evident in the companion handbook that goes along with the progress report. because that level of detail is really important
Right.
for teachers to see and parents. And one other comment, and I hope Jeannie can jump in here. I'm glad that you referenced the literacy piece, and I know we talk about literacy all the time, and math is so important too. So Ronnie Rhodey, I hope you're listening to me as I say that. And, you know, and really, when we think about literacy, you can't, for children to really excel in mathematics, there is such a great deal of reading involved. So that's one piece that I want us to also focus on perhaps in future curriculum committee meetings, the connection between the two. And additionally, when we think about fluency, when we talk about fluency with reading, for example, right? If children aren't fluent readers, comprehension is affected and impacted. Similarly with mathematics, if children don't have fluency with mathematics, their ability and their ability to compute is hindered. More complex problem solving is also challenging, right? And children's ability to do and engage in mental math. But I know I could see Jeannie was she wants to jump in, I think, on at least the mathematics conversation, right?
Yeah, we were talking about fact fluency, and I think sometimes we put fact fluency together with accuracy, and sometimes speed is not necessarily what we need. So if I'm looking at the mathematical practices where it says shows work and uses math tools to solve problems with precision, we're looking to see, do they know their facts in order to work through that problem correctly? So they may not be the fastest kid, but they still are able to hold those math facts, work through that problem. I'm thinking fourth and fifth when they're getting to the multi-step problems where they've really got to be able to show that work, which kind of goes back to the handwriting that you talked about of
Right.
all of that has to be legible. So handwriting is a piece, fact fluency is a piece, being able to show your work, show your thinking of how do you know that answer is right? And like, we've taken that speed piece out of it. And I think that's
Yeah,
important.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shifting back to the idea about like just thinking about maps and the specifics and
Right.
stuff, is there thought to, with that handbook or whatever is going to be sent with the progress report, saying, okay, in the second trimester in third grade social studies, we did X, Y, and Z? Like, is there a way, I mean, I know teachers do newsletters and that kind of stuff, but is there a way to be a little more discreet of this is what we did during this marking period, and this is what you're being?
I would say that would be more of a curriculum, information, parent letter, and maybe that needs to be more consistent. In the handbook, it's these are the skills and the expectations for learning specifically. So for example, with the grammar, what are the specific skills at each grade level? That would be something that's important. The content of what actually parents will be able to see that in EduPlan of what
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking like
Students are
a cover
learning.
letter that could go with
Mhm.
the
And
progress
these are
report,
the
like in
skills.
the math, we worked on this, and reading, we worked on this, you know, that kind of, just so there's a little bit of a framework of this is what, if the skills are, to use your word, a little more, if the markings are a little more generic, then here is what we were thinking about while we were doing that. I just thought.
Yeah, just to follow up with that, and I understand your point, Katie, about the curriculum is one thing. I guess I'm thinking about this, and I'm looking at, for instance, grade 5, science and social studies. We took out all reference in science and social studies to applies concept and skills or locates processes and, information from text and other sources, which is, I think, different than what we're proposing, which is demonstrates an understanding of basic concepts. Because I think you can understand a basic concept, but you might not be able to, for instance, locate and apply information from a text or other sources.
which is really a reading skill.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
But-
now that you said that, I'm going back into the
This
reading
is,
and
I mean,
writing. to see if
but this is for giving parents feedback about how their child is progressing over, 3 different conferences throughout an academic year. If your child is able to understand a basic concept in social studies, but they can't actually perform the research and find the source that they need and then apply that to get to do their basic research paper, then they may understand the basic concepts of social studies, but they won't necessarily be progressing in the skills that will be needed in middle school and then high school. And that's where, from a progress report standpoint, as a parent, I would want to know if my child is deficient in those skills, where would that be communicated? Because these new progress reports, I don't think really capture that.
I do think that the teachers would get to that in literacy. I think it's so integrated, those skills. And with the application, the level of depth at the elementary level is not the same as secondary level in those, in the things that
Right,
you're asking
understood.
about, like
Yeah,
the application piece, it's, do they understand the concepts enough to share their learning? It was hard to really explain that language, like what does that mean, apply? Yes, they
Okay.
might be creating maps, but you know, in terms of really like how much time are they spending creating like an intricate map that really shows the intricacies of like conceptual, it's just at a different
So it was
level.
hard for the teachers to actually
Mhm.
evaluate. Is that what
Right.
you're saying? Because I
Right, and
understand if
they
that's a
want to
different.
provide,
yeah.
they want to take those key skills
Okay.
and be able to provide.
And I would think
information
that the
about
writing component of the progress report is not just, you know, in the literacy block, in the writing, it also
Right,
includes
it is
social studies
integrated in
writing
everything.
and,
Mhm,
and, you know,
right.
science writing and also
Mhm,
and math
yeah.
writing, like it's
Mhm.
all encompassing, not necessarily
Mhm.
blacked out. All right, more questions on this?
Just two quick ones. I just wanted to ask when we might be able to see a preview of the handbook. I think that sounds like a really exciting addition and tool to go along with progress reports. And then I also wanted to ask about sharing of Ames web scores and if there had been any discussion about that. So historically, Ames web scores were not shared with parents unless they were specifically requested. And I do feel that I think that parents like to know. I think that it can be helpful and, you know, understanding the concept of like snapshot in time and the context. I'm wondering if when the progress reports coming out, if maybe Ames web scores up until that point are shared at that point too. So then they can be part of the discussion with conferences maybe. So even if it's a couple of Ames webs, it can kind of be like, you know, here was our first assessment from the beginning of the year. And then we did 2 more since then. So you can see the growth and then there's a conversation about it so I'm just wondering if that is part of this
Or
discussion.
even, could there be just, you know, a piece of the progress report that this is the Ames web score from, you know, January 2nd, this is the Ames web, I don't know how you feel about sharing all that out, but.
We have been talking about how, what we're sharing with families
Okay.
throughout the year.
Okay.
And that'll be a part of that discussion. As far as the handbook, that's going to be some summer work. So I would say probably for our summer update. that
And
would be
is your
good.
plan to have this new version out as of October, November of next year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Further questions on this? We good? All right, moving on to our favorite topic of K-3 literacy.
Just want to make one more note of that. And Jeannie, you are welcome to school. If your kids are missing you and you want to run back, that's okay. But I know you've also been involved in the K-3 literacy piece, especially given your role in with our DEA partnership. So today's update is meant to be a brief, you know, kind of high level overview. But one of the things that was discussed at the board table was kind of a one-sheeter. And obviously literacy is complex, so we did our best to get it to one page, but we did provide reading and writing. So the writing spilled over onto a second page. And one of the things that I know Julie will talk us through here is that while we're looking at a resource and we're looking at the standards, we also want to be thinking about instructional practices. So one of the things that we also want to think about is being really clear with the components of a literacy block. And we don't want to make any assumptions that any of our families understand, for example, what an interactive read aloud is and what the purpose of that might be to support children's reading comprehension, for example. So you'll see what that kind of framework looks like. And I know Julie will talk about how that will be used by the core review team that will be meeting a few more times before our May time with this board curriculum committee again. And she'll also talk about decision-making process. And if Jeannie, if you are staying, of course, I would encourage you to contribute with regard to what you're hearing from our colleagues. And when we gather again in May, we'll have colleagues around the table, representatives from this smaller core review team that are kind of analyzing and synthesizing our process for the last 16 months or so. And of course, there is a special educator in that smaller subgroup who will also, the intention is, be with us during that May curriculum committee meeting. So there will be more teachers with us then to talk about the process and kind of our proposed resolution and recommendation.
So this really is a very brief update today, whereas Amy said, I'm going to just talk about the decision-making process, our subgroup, just some focus groups and program comparison. These are the members of our smaller subgroup. They're all on our core review team. We have representation from all 5 elementary schools, gen ed, right, special educators, preschool to grade 3, and administration. And this team started, and this took us a really long time. We know the components of high quality literacy instruction. We know what's included from the phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, comprehension, vocabulary. But we wanted to really flesh out what does that look like. So let me click on the reading. I think you have a copy of this one pager. And we did this for reading and writing. If you could just zoom in on that. As Amy said, within comprehension, these are the instructional methods that we use to teach it. So we wanted to make sure that everybody had clarity and as we're going forward, this is what we're looking for. This is the why, this is the how, and this is what students are doing. And our team is going to synthesize all the information and look at our current resources and into reading. So this is comprehension, and then the structured literacy piece, the phonemic awareness, the decoding, and we even broke out phonics into decoding and encoding, the high frequency words. So we got really granular because this is the tool that we want to use when we make our decision. And we separated reading and writing. In writing, again, we put the explicit instruction, the time for writing, because we know that's important. The small group differentiated instruction, again, we all value that. And then encoding, we put it in writing because that's the transfer, and that grammar and mechanics. So these are the things that we are looking for. And that's what we'll be sharing with you. We are meeting this Friday. We're meeting for a full day. We have a lot of data to review. Amy and I met with every single school and had focus groups with teachers. We invited everybody. We had a really nice participation, and it was just an honest discussion about what's working, what's not. What do you want us to know? We took notes on that. We have feedback from our pilot teachers from throughout the year, notes from our core review team meetings, the evaluation tool by grade level, which was how we organized our notes. We have feedback we sent out another survey to teachers. They're so surveyed out, but it's good information. We have feedback from our focus groups. We have classroom observations from our administrators, and then we're looking at our student data. So there's a lot of information that is going into making this decision. And we have a consensus building protocol because, we know that every decision needs multiple perspectives. So this is our process, and you can read this. We have another full day to go through all of this. And this is a slide that was shared in December, but just an overview of the components. And I do want you to know that we are teaching the science of reading right now. So I want you to feel good about that. Like our program, we are using Heggerty, which is phonemic awareness, and we are using Foundation. So I don't want you to feel that our kids are on hold right now. So we have really good instruction, and we're always looking at ways to strengthen it.
Okay.
And again, our timeline, which you've seen multiple times, our next curriculum committee meeting is probably our most important, and then the board meeting.
Thanks. So Mr. Grambling had a quick question about the framework, which he said was great, but he was questioning if maybe there should be another column of just, the winner of that. Is there a, just so you could see which one was weighing, which one was,
I think you'll see
More
that. in
okay.
Yeah.
okay.
I like it.
Yeah.
You can set another column, when we think about what the narrative is or how we roll it out information that has more specificity, maybe we can highlight. That's good, maybe some good feedback.
Yeah.
So for kind of a quick.
Just, yeah, exactly. Like if it's clear that, this column is highlighted, well, then there's the
Yeah.
easy answer, right? And then his other question was, should there be a board member in the decision-making subgroup for the for this? And I mean, we delegate to you to choose our curriculum, so that's love your thoughts on that.
So, right, so the way the policy is written is that the board delegates to the administration to do this work. And I also think it's really important to trust in the expertise of our staff. Our teaching staff, again, I just want to emphasize a steering committee that's preschool through grade 12, because we're looking at the articulation of literacy learning throughout all grades to make sure we have a coherent program, because the work will clearly continue after this. Because we need to be thinking about the implementation and any shifts that are made, and then what happens in grades 4 through 12. And with our current kids that are in those grades that maybe have had different programming, and we'll talk about that with MTSS. But it's really important to also trust the expertise of our staff. And I just want to emphasize our staff has really been engrossed in this work for 16 months. I think it would be very challenging for anybody to just jump in now.
Yeah.
In addition to the expertise that they bring to the table as is, there's been a great degree of professional learning and just really deep conversation to this point. And I trust in that with our staff. In fact, with our last small core review team meeting that has the group that Julie just showed before, one of the teachers said, wow, this is a really smart group. And my comment was, I feel like I just had a graduate course, like a seminar. And so again, I go back to the end result of this. We also need to value the process and the professional learning that's happened in the last 16 months and will continue to inform professional learning moving forward.
Right.
So that's the answer to that.
No, I just agree with that, and just sort of like respectfully, just dropping somebody in at the moment is not, it wouldn't be good for the process. And
Yeah.
And there'll be a good chance, you're gonna have to approve curriculum,
Yeah,
so it'll be a good
absolutely.
chance to have a discussion
Yeah.
about it.
Thank you for saying that, Amy. I can't resist the opportunity to just give a shout out to our teachers, because I know this has been a huge undertaking for them. And to your point, Julia, I know that all of our teachers really care about every student, and they're not willing to let, anyone go a year without getting what they need. So thank you to all of them for really putting in that work this year and what's going to come, right, with all of that. I did want to ask just a couple of quick questions. I think this framework is great. This is new, right? This is a tool that you developed for the next meeting. I think that's fantastic. I like the way that you broke it out with comprehension, with structured literacy, with the writing. I think that's very clear, and I'm excited to hear what you guys come back with as part of that discussion. I did have one other question. I'm sorry, and I lost it. Maybe I didn't. Thank you for that. This sounds like you guys are really getting to the final steps and formalizing it, and this looks really great. So
No one
thanks for
can
all
say
that
you're
work.
not thorough.
Just one other comment. Thank you for recognizing that, Katie. And additionally, again, this framework, which is homegrown, we did use Curate earlier in the year to think about our rubric for analyzing the resources. And now we're making that connection. What's the nexus between resource, curriculum, and instruction? The thing that is really important to recognize is at the other side of this, there'll be a great deal of professional learning to talk about, well, as a school system, do we have a shared understanding of what does high quality literacy instruction encompass? What's the expectation for a literacy block? And making sure that we have a common understanding of what all of those pieces are, so that there can be really assured experiences across the district, across the 5 schools, across the grade levels. And I know that's the commitment that our staff has, and that's really the work that they're leading.
So just in thinking about that moving forward, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. As you think about your teachers, your elementary teachers that are going to have to institute a huge lift one way or the other, do you feel like you have what you need, they have what you need to be able to do that in a relatively quick timeline? And can we help you with any of things with that?
It is a quick timeline. I think a couple of things that have come my way is making sure that we have our hands on whatever resources those are, so that teachers can start reviewing them, going through them. I think Amy said it, the professional development professional development piece that's going to go with this is extremely important. Whether they're ELP, whether they're grade 5, there's gonna be shifts in what
Yeah.
we're doing. And just making sure, you know, we're aligned across all 5 schools, but we're also aligned for. So, you know, the sooner we can get our hands on those resources,
Right.
the better.
And I would think that those that are doing, if interreading is the way we're going, and I don't want to have, there's no spoiler, I don't know anything that
Right.
no one else doesn't know, but you know, the people that are in the buildings that have already been doing that they will be relied on heavily, one would think,
Yes.
for that professional development. So.
And we've been talking about, it's not the resource, it's the teacher, but in our last core review team meeting, and actually during the focus groups, teachers said, you know, I'd really like to be involved in the professional learning and helping to lead and facilitate that, because there's been, again, such deep professional learning in the last 16 months. So our internal capacity is different and I believe strengthened as a result of this work.
Yeah, I think there's a great opportunity for some leadership possibilities too, for those teachers that have already been.
The professional learning is the most important piece,
Yes.
because regardless of the program, we always know that it's the teacher in the classroom that makes the difference.
I would actually maybe, I know in the budget discussion, we were talking about professional learning and half days and so on and so forth. And I would maybe even consider coming back to the board for just one exception. To give these people just a chunk of time, because your first chunk of time is limited with everything you've got to do. If you want to implement this properly, we have to find a wee bit of time. So I wouldn't rule out the possibility of coming for an exception to here's another half day, just to, like, it will, in the long run, it's going to be better for our kids and our families for this to be rolled out sort of like correctly and with enough professional development for the staff. So I'm not going to rule out coming back and saying I would ask the board just to consider in this for this particular case some extra time for the staff.
Thank you for that. And I think that that's a really important piece as we get further along, right? As we're looking at what decision are we making? Where is Darien going in terms of literacy in the future? And how are we going to get there? I think that's really important. And being specific about where we want to go and how we need to get there is a great conversation to have, rather than, sign up sort of something general, like we always kind of love this, being like, we need this for this. So please bring that back to us. I did remember my other question. I wanted to ask about the student component of evaluating the programs that we're using as well. So in looking at the, sorry, I just blanked on it, in looking at the instructional framework. So that looks like a really great tool to be comparing program to program, but I'm curious about how and when we might be comparing the use of materials with the student and the teacher experience. So for example, how are we going to be evaluating the use of a program in terms of how many times does a student need to be exposed to a concept before they get it? How many children are going to need MTMSS now versus before? How are we kind of looking at that actual student data, maybe even more than just the program comparison data?
It's hard right now to see how many times. I mean, we know through our assessments whether students need more time in practice. How they'll move through the MTSS process, it's all based on our assessments and what we're seeing in students. And we're not seeing a difference right now in the program.
So this will be part of the continual evaluation.
Yeah.
So next year, when we have a decision and we're moving on that's where this work will continue into saying, like, did we need to go back and review concepts more than we were planning to? Are there certain ones that more difficult? What are our numbers looking like versus past?
Mhm.
That's part of the.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think anytime, regardless of the shift we make, and that we'll have, that's coming into focus now. You could see it, you could feel it within the group, as the group gathers. Implementation is an issue, right? When you think about change management, it's really important to think about how complex that is. And, that learning is messy for adults too. And so I hope that one of the takeaways that we'll have, and I actually was speaking with a third grade teacher in another school, not Henley, yesterday, and she said, Amy, I hope that the teachers can hear that from you, especially in August, regardless of the resource. Learning is messy for adults too, and we need to create as leaders the conditions for the adults to give themselves grace to learning resources, to be thinking about instructional shifts, to be thinking about shifts in assessment practices and communicating how our kids are making progress. And so I think as a board and a leadership team, it's important for us to have that message out there. That's another thing. We need the resources in hands early. That's a definite theme with wherever we land. We need the professional learning opportunities, and I think the staff just needs to feel very supported.
Yeah.
And any shifts that they make at any level, whether it's a mathematics shift, it's just really an important message.
I think that we, and I know you are, but need to be cognizant of how much we're adding, right, to people's plates. Like, this is a huge, huge, huge lift, and this might be a large shift in people's processes, so.
And I just want to be mindful and advocate for our elementary teachers. We also have, they also teach all content
Mhm.
areas. And we also have 3 schools that are involved in a major renovation that's going to involve classroom moves, sometimes multiple. So I just, I
It's a
want to make
lot.
sure that we're really like looking out for our teachers.
It's a lot, so we are grateful. Any further questions?
I compliment the whole process. I do think, I agree that this framework that you've provided with the rubric of, all the detail here is really, really helpful. And I agree with Katie. I mean, not just for comparing resources, but I would imagine it might be helpful even for future, if we did adopt a new resource, for example, and then it's working so well, would we want to expand it to 4th and 5th grade? Because I think, some resources have extended kind of opportunities. And then, as we had previously talked as a board, for middle school, helping improve vocabulary instruction, grammar instruction, and to the extent that this is a K through 12 core review team, maybe starting to also think about opportunities that we might have that would benefit our middle school English and, instruction to kind of continue to build some of those competencies. And those were specific areas that we had talked about previously.
Yeah, and
Thank
we,
you.
we recognize, the audience at home probably can't see, but we recognize that Kristen Colonies is here today, and Kristen has not been as directly involved in the deep work of this, but she knows that there's momentum and that there's going to be a ripple effect. And so we're talking, more and more about what the impact will be for 12. And again, for our kids, when we think about MTSS, who might have a deficiency in some area or need to shore up some skills. So that would be, I would expect, and I've already signaled this to Kristen, another Board of Ed Curriculum Committee topic.
Perfect.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I can tell you that speaking to my peers, no matter what they're doing or not doing, or what they pick or not pick, I have yet to have one to discuss the process, of the intense process and the significant process that our staff, both teachers and administrators, have committed to. So the board should feel very good about that,
do.
wherever we land in terms of it. This has been a thoughtful process. We've included the state the whole way along. I'm actually expecting the state to be very supportive of whatever we do. But anyway, the process is pretty significant, as you know.
Indeed. Thank you. All right, moving on to public comment.
Good morning. If anybody online would like to participate in public comment, please use the raised hand icon and wait to be recognized. We have no raised hands
Okay,
at this.
motion to adjourn.